So we covered a little bit. I work at Amplitude. We help people make better products with product analytics. I have a writing habit on Medium. I think I've lost count. It might be 370 or 380 posts at the moment. Is 500,000 words. It's a lot. There's a lot of time spent doing that. Too much time. And I'm fairly active on Twitter as well, if you want to get in touch with me there. I like to tell a little bit more about sort of the inspiration of the person. So there's probably two things that I care very, very deeply about. One is that I'm kind of biased to the frontline folks, the problem solvers on the front lines, data scientists on the front lines, developers, designers, et cetera, feeling the impact for their work. So you might notice that there's a little bit of bias in this talk that, it's very important for me to see those people sense that their work is making a difference. But I do realize that not everyone feels that way, and some companies work perfectly fine without necessarily that happening, but it's just a bias that I have. The second is that I'm also a big advocate for kind of large-scale continuous improvement. This idea of getting like 50 people together, or 100 or 150 people to solve organizational problems. I don't touch on that as much, but it's something that I'm passionate about. If you read the Medium thing, you'll start running into a bunch of posts about that, and you'll be confused about what he's going on, but that's what I'm getting at. Also, you can see from the string of experience I've had in the past, it's a lot of B2B SaaS. There's a couple years ago, I was at Appfolio, which is a property management company based in Southern California. So I've had a string of B2B SaaS things, so I wouldn't regard myself as an expert in Zynga-esque experimentation. A lot of this is bringing the outcome-driven mindset into B2B SaaS. So that's sort of my bias and where I'm coming from. So why this particular talk? If you sort of follow the writing about product management, there's probably a year or two or three where every post was about outcomes over outputs. And what I came to realize, I wrote my own fair share of posts like that too. One was called 12 Signs You Know You're Working in a Feature Factory. And lots of people read that. I think 500,000 people have read that post. And they're very angsty about it. But it's kind of a no shit statement if you think about it. Like, who doesn't want outcomes? So I started to think about this more, and I was like, well, how can we talk about what really matters? So then what matters is the coherence, the purpose, the impact that we're seeing. Sometimes you're going to be working on building exactly this. You have to be able to link that all the way up to the long-term business outcomes that you hope to create with that. The other thing I began to notice when I looked at this is that even the teams that were taking a very experiment-driven approach were solving these optimization problems, but they were caught in a local maximum, right? They were solving, even at search relevance, it's like we moved the mean reciprocal rank of this particular search result up by this, and we think people are having more effective searches. In that case, we didn't really link it to, are we reducing, are we increasing agent efficiency, as an example at Zendesk? So we were kind of hyper-focused on a problem, and that started to bother me a lot. Like, there has to be a better way to do that. The last year or so I spent consulting, and this is another thing that bugged me too, was that you'd meet a lot of organizations who saw what Netflix was doing, or Amazon was doing, or Zynga was doing, and they would just say, well, we can't, it will never work here. We can't take this type of approach. We're beholden to a feature factory. That's what we have to do. We tried experimenting, it didn't work. And so so this was kind of why this talk. This is a bunch of they seem unrelated, but hopefully we'll tie these things together as the talk goes on. So to give you a kind of brief overview of the talk, first we'll talk about the outcomes, no shit. The next is why impact-driven approaches is hard, why they're hard. And then we'll dig into this idea of nested bets or Russian dolls, or the idea that we're always dealing in a continuum of kind of impulse and response as we're working. And then some things you can do right now. That's probably the bulk of the talk, maybe the last 10 minutes. We'll just talk about some specific things you can do right now in your organization to try to become more impact-driven, impact-focused. So who doesn't want outcomes? It was 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a CEO, and he kind of, like, we'd had one or two cocktails, and then he turns around and he's like, John, it seems like there's this idea that it's a conspiracy theory on the part of the C-suite to just have outputs in an organization. Who doesn't want outcomes? The community, product community sort of acts like it's this foregone conclusion. There's a switch that you turn and suddenly your organization becomes outcome driven, and it's just a conspiracy why that switch is not turned. Well, it's not really like that. And so I do these doodles, but if you think about it, if you think, we could probably add inputs to this too in some sense, but if you think about outcomes, output and outcomes and benefits to the organization, I like to think of it as orbiting planets almost, or a solar system, right? Like benefits, especially in B2B SaaS, might take 8 months or 12 months or 18 months to materialize. And some outputs might take 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And some outcomes or near-term outcomes might fit into that particular thing. So the challenge really isn't outcomes versus outputs, it's more, can we tighten these loops down to the point where we can actually act on the outcomes and change what we're doing from a product strategy standpoint. So that was kind of the first aha moment, which is really, it is too simplistic. We need to think about tightening these feedback loops, and that's kind of an important direction to take. So the other aha moment for me too was I was speaking to a developer, and it was really sad, actually. We were having this heart-to-heart conversation, and he sort of described, I dreamed that I would be able to solve, in paraphrasing, like I dreamed I'd be able to solve problems with technology. Like that's what I dreamed about being able to do. And in the organization at the moment, what we're working on is that I can't do that. But the critical point, because that makes sense, probably we can all relate to that on some level, is that they found themselves retreating into tech, retreating back into the craft. And that became their problem to solve. They loved that problem. They liked solving that problem. And so that was another big moment for me when I realized that, like, this is a pretty serious thing. Like, people are getting into this business or getting into these things to solve problems. And unless we can help them connect their work to the thing that matters to the business, we're actually losing people. So this particular person has worked at seven Silicon Valley companies for 2 years apiece over the last 14 years and collected their stock for the last 14 years. And they just bail because the technical problem becomes not very interesting after about 2 years. So they're doing pretty well, I can say that. It's actually not a bad search strategy if you think about it. Yes, we should consider that. Maybe there's the outcome. So why does this happen? And we've discussed some of these things, but I have talked to a lot of teams, and I did this survey recently, and I'm doing more research, because at Amplitude, my goal is to help up-level teams. So the question was, well, what's getting in the way? What really is getting in the way? So there are a couple of reasons. By far, the one that rose to the top was sort of structural, cultural reasons in the organization. And by far, the number one thing was some difficulty dealing with the idea of uncertainty. This idea that there was this risk aversion, the idea that you needed to have the right answer, the idea as a product manager, you better be able to spit it out in a tweet about what's going to be able to happen. Don't say, I don't know, right? So this is like, it's structural and cultural. The organization is structured in a way which makes it difficult to get information moving around the organization. All these things contribute to some level. So that seems to be the bed. That's the bed. Like, without that, that's this number one issue. So my friend Dean did these things. So Hippo, highest paid person's opinion, but I like the other ones, the Rhino, the really, really high value new opportunity. Zebra, zero evidence, but really arrogant. Dean is awesome. These are super, super cool. Wolf works on latest fire, and Seagull management, part 5 of the product, and leave a big mess. Dump on everyone and leave a big mess. I thought that these are like very perfectly, Dean is awesome, by the way. So he has this Dean on delivery thing, which is really cool. So this kind of falls in this line, so this is like the alignment, the coherence issue that I'm talking about. Can you focus your efforts in such a way to be able to create the outcomes you want? So a lot of teams even noted that their culture was pretty failure-friendly, they're pretty uncertainty-friendly, but there was just this cluster F right there in the middle around just decision-making was really slow, they couldn't find that alignment, and there's all these different styles of decision-making thrown in. This made it very difficult. Dean's gonna love that. I think he's looking for a job. Dean's really good. So on top of that, then you have this short-termism, which we can all kind of relate to. And this is not just a B2B SaaS thing. This is, crap, we have to push this metric with 50 million people. It's going to have a poor social outcome in 12 years or something. But there's no lack of, short-termism isn't just something in sales-led companies. It's everywhere, right? We've got to hit these goals. We've got to be able to hit these quarters and do these things. And people note that that's one of the biggest drivers of the feature factory, which is it's doing the success theater that it takes to be able to create these near-term outcomes. And so I think it is amazing, the people who deal with such a a high end that they can do small little experiments that then create a dollar value benefit right away. I think in the rest of the world, or the rest of the world of product management, maybe the 90% or 95% of products, we don't enjoy that same really tight causal loop right there. So this comes in. The next thing is what I call Tetris, which is this high utilization problem. So even if you have those other things, you have a great culture, you're aligned. I mean, ostensibly you could say the Tetris wouldn't come in. And then you're take a midterm, near-term, a near long-term sustainable approach to product development. All the teams are at 99% utilization. There's no time to do this. And so what someone's doing is back there say, well, Joe could work 50% on that, 50% on that, which means that they're going to work 30% on one, 30% on the other, and multitask for the other 40%, right? Or they're going to, well, if we pull Joe off that project and we get this happening, then we can fit this project in at this point. That's the plain Tetris, right? And so there's this idea that even if you're taking aspirationally as a company, you're loaded up to this, no one is going to stop. There's just no time to be able to do these things because you've already pre-committed to be able to fit everything into things. Now, of course, this makes things take insanely long time anyway, which then doubles back into the problem in the first place. We totally don't have time because we totally had a missed quarter. Now we totally need to do this success theory to be able to hit this goal. It becomes this cycle, and that's very problematic. And then the tail end, as much as, obviously I'm addicted to working at these companies, I worked at a couple of them now, the data access is very important at Amplitude, it was very important at Pendo, and is it integrated into data activities, the tooling we have, the skills that we're bringing to the table. It's this is the long tail of problems. These are all big problems, like this whole market that we've created, but they sit on top of these other problems that you have. I think that one thing that I've learned over the case is the sort of unsung challenge is the data engineering problem. In many organizations I've consulted with, they made a substantial investment in data scientists only to find out that they really needed 3 times as many data engineers. Like they 1 or 2 data scientists accompanied by data engineers could get the same work done. So that's definitely a huge problem. So what I did is I flipped everything to create a pyramid of what you could say you might need to be able to address this problem. So at the bottom we have the trust, the safety, embrace uncertainty, autonomy. Those are those cultural things. One level up is that coherent strategy, context, alignment, focus. One level up from that is then you have mission-driven teams. You give them slack time to experiment, which is super important. And then you have these tooling skills and access at the top. So I took these 5 minutes to just kind of paint the picture of where the issues are. So the bets. To a T, I've been doing these workshops now for the last year, and I asked teams to describe how many levels are in your work. And they usually describe 3 levels. And then we dig in about what levels are in their work. And there's 1 to 3 hour tasks, 1 to 3 days, 1 to 3 weeks, 1 to 3 months, 1 to 3 quarters, 1 to 3 years, 1 to 3 decades. Like, it's much more complex than people make it out and how roadmaps tend to oversimplify the work and other things that we're doing. So in the last year, the big sort of, again, aha for me was that most traditional versions of road mapping or discussing even how you're working tend to oversimplify this. And then we lose context, which then causes teams not to, even if they're experimenting very diligently locally, they just don't know what it's tying into. They don't know how it fits into the biggest picture. What you also realize when you look at this, and this is, I think, a highly problematic thing with teams. Have you ever had the discussion, who owns the problem, who owns the solution in your organization? So we've just discussed the bets, right, that everything's in. So I would say every problem is a nested solution to a higher level problem. Hitting the quarter at X million dollars is actually a solution to some other problem that exists. It's not, though that dichotomy, I think, exacerbates the problem when we go in there. And sometimes you need to experiment to be able to experiment. Sometimes you need to be experiment to be able to understand the problem. Sometimes you need to fail at solving the problem to be able to understand the solution. So this was another thing that kind of boiled out as I started to think of this continuum and the impacts it has in organizations. And then my favorite manifestation of this is OKRs. Man, I have so much to say about OKRs. But it's just one of those things that, like, I know that there's companies, especially within like 20 miles of here, that do it perfectly, but like out there in the rest of the country. So if you think about, this quarter, fourth quarter, 2018 is going to have 62 business days, of which it seems like teams spend 5 or 10 of those days kind of rushed trying to dream up what their next OKRs are going to be. And then everyone's asking what the big picture is going to be. They don't know how it fits into these longer term bets. They've been told that there's a cascading set of goals. It's really management by objectives, just under another name. And hurry, 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 what's your OKR? And so I was just talking to someone yesterday, and I said, well, how's your OKR thing going for Q4? We just made them up. I was like, well, what do you mean you made them up? Well, we didn't really have the big, like the other people weren't done yet. We didn't know these things, but they're our goal. Like this is our performance management. So it didn't quite fit in like what OKRs were meant for, but I think this is a manifestation. OKRs aren't inherently bad, but I think they're a manifestation of this kind of nesting problem. Because if you're not making it clear what those goals are and where everything fits in and how the 1 to 3 hour thing links to the 1 to 3 year thing, it's very hard to make sense of these kind of push-based performance triggers or goals. So what does this all do? I just alluded to this, but it creates what I call the messy middle of planning. And this has a high impact, I think, for being impact-driven and experimenting, which is teams have a lot of clarity up to about 1 month or 3 months because that's what they're doing now. They go to stand-up. They talk about it. Someone has it up on a board. Someone does these things. And they have a lot of clarity on what the company is pitching to investors or pitching to the market or pitching everything, which is the 1 to 3 year things. They understand that, but those are terribly vague. So the reason why I think this impacts impact-driven approaches, or experiment-driven approaches is, again, it's that local maximum problem. If you're not clear and crisp about these rocks, which teams seem to get lost because they're not updated every day, but they're too tactical for a C-level to understand, they're too high-level for a frontliner to maybe understand, so it just gets lost. If you don't clarify these particular things work, it makes it very difficult to persuade your organization to have a mission-driven team. Because you get stuck in what the near term of 1 to 3 week, very specific things you're doing. So, I do these drawings again, but anyway, you see it's a mess. I won't go through this particular thing. So you have this full range, so any effort to say problem versus solution, or build versus run, or anything, it just doesn't fit in modern product development. It's a much messier situation. It's more of like a value creation network than it is just a hierarchical tree of these particular things. So on 1 to 3 hours, you could be working on a task. 1 to 3 years or the decade, you're making bets on a market landscape shift, or you're doing something. So, I think I'm doing okay on time. So there's a couple things that I suggest that you could do about it right now to be able to tame this beast. So what I'm basically saying, it's a beast. It's complex, it's a beast, it's difficult. But I think that there are some things you can do right now to alleviate this problem. The first thing is, and I get a lot of angst on Twitter and on Medium about people who feel like, I'm working in the feature factory, what do I do? It doesn't make any sense. But here's what I asked them. If someone told you what you were doing had a massive impact for the company, would you care as much? And I said, like, if I told you do exactly this, and exactly that would make the company $10 million, would you be angsty? They're like, no, that would be great. I just want to know it has impact. So that was the big realization, that it's not build exactly this type work. It happens. It does happen. Build something that does this, build something that lets customers do this, solve this customer problem, improve this experience, optimize this metric, all the way down to a 7 or 8 level goal on this. So what you realize is a couple things. One, not all teams are capable of tackling 5, 6, 7, 8 level goals. They're not skilled yet. You're not supporting them in your organization, and then you're throwing them in to the fire with an outcome-driven thing. They don't have the skills. They might not have the tooling yet. They don't have the particular things. And you have other teams that want only to thrive at that particular level. So the first thing I could leave you with is to do exercises with your team to be very explicit about this work and look at the work that you're doing. Because what I've found is by sort of taking the anxiety out of this question and being explicit about your working agreements and agreeing as an organization to tie the 1 level work to the 8 level work, then you don't have that anxiety internally about, you're just telling us what to do. Or, you're not telling us enough. That's the PM's life. Either, it's so vague, we can't work on it. Well, yeah, but you told me you wanted to take this outcome-driven approach. And then you give the outcome-driven approach, like, or the specific, this is too specific. We can't work on it, right? So that's our life, right? Like, that's what happens. So you can help this process along by doing this. The next thing is I'm a big believer in these experiment-driven boards or goal-driven boards. So this is a hybrid Kanban board, and you have a backlog of goals. And you pull in this example, 3 goals. Those are the epics and goals that you see over there on the left. And then you create a backlog of experiments to run against that particular goal. This is not really earth-shattering, but you'd be amazed how there's this kind of dual world in an organization where the teams are very outcome-driven, but the rest of the organization just wants to see roadmaps with features on it. And so this is a critical thing. Like, the more you can embed this type of thinking where the artifacts you use, Jira, the other stuff you use, you reiterate the idea that you're bringing in goals. You have a backlog of goals, and you're attempting to experiment towards moving those particular goals. You'll notice, too, like when I visit these organizations, I just scan the boards and I look for the done column. And I can tell like a million things by looking at every Kanban board and thing. And when there's done, and I'm looking at the size of the work, I'm like, all right, I know what we're getting into at this point. So you notice there's just a review here, there's validation on the right. This can have a really big impact in your organization, and you can start it locally on your team. You don't need to change the whole organization. You can just do your little world. You can improve with this particular thing. Oh, there we go. There's a lot on this thing, but what I've done is I work with teams to create this idea of nested bets. And I'll share this slide deck out so you can see the exact details, but I think you can understand if I explain it in plain English, is that we have a goal, a bet, and there's a why, which is our because statement. So we're going to do this because we assume or we know information. And we want to create guardrails for the team. So in trying to achieve this goal, what is your guardrails? We're going to do this without maybe cannibalizing clicks from some other place, or with making sure that we, adhere to brand standards for our company or something. And then the next part is by trying some idea solution, which also has its own because, while, without, and by, and then you can do by trying, and you can do while, without, and all the way down the line. Now you can modify something like this for your company, but this is how I've started doing roadmaps and painting the picture for the organization, because what OKRs miss is the assumptions backing them. Your most skilled problem solvers are going to be like, yeah, I get what we're doing in 1 to 3 months, but that goal you're telling us to optimize against, there's maybe other ways to be able to achieve that goal. What are the baked-in assumptions there? What do I need to know about? So by using like nested techniques like this, you can clarify what your bets are so that the passionate problem solvers on your team, I'm that guy, right? Like I was the guy 10 years ago in my career when I'd be like, yeah, but we could achieve that goal another way. There will always be the 30% of the people on the team like me and like a lot of you folks because you're here at the conference. Ask the why. So you want to be able to paint a coherent picture of the work you're doing in the 1 to 3 hour range to the 1 to 8, the 1 to 3 decades. And so with every PM, when I'm sort of working with a company to train up their PMs, I'm like, I should be able to come to you in the hall, and you need to be able to talk about any ticket we pull out of Jira that's in the sprint now and tie it up to a 1 to 3 year goal at a minimum, or 1 to 3 decade goal for the company has. And you need to be able to do it like that. And it's a muscle. You have to train that muscle. And once you train the muscle, you can be really good at it. The next thing, Goonies. Showing the age. So in Goonies is a great example of what I call starting together. And it's one of the #1 challenges that organizations have for taking an impact-driven approach, is that you're so congested and so overutilized that you send these pilot teams to suss out problems and then drop them on the team. There is no, in the haunted house movies, like when the people open the team after the montage, right? Like they open the door and they experience the problem at the same time. That's what you want with your team. Like you want these expressions like, look, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. Because the minute that some data scientist in the PM or whoever has like in a back room tried to sort this out and clarify it, as a UX researcher, I'd facilitate like 2 weeks away from keyboards. So obviously for some developers, that was like the end of the world. But we were successful. But someone asked me, I was interviewed today, like, well, how did you continue doing that? I think my friend Raul asked, like, how did you manage to do that? We just kicked ass. That's how we did it. Because then people looked at it and said, like, it sucked being away from the keyboards for 2 weeks, but we've continuously kicked butt every time we stepped away, we visited customers, we got in a van, we did drawing together, we did those things. So you want to bring the team to start together. That's something that you can do. It's hard, but wrong button. The next thing is that you need to elevate the reduction of technical debt and those issues to a first-class citizen in your organization. Like, if you imagine that you have a value creation system, anything that creates drag in that system might be the #1 most valuable thing you could work on. So I tweeted something recently that, I don't know, lots of people liked it, where I said, like, I've seen organizations go from a reference feature time of 15 to 30 days to 150 to 300 days in 3 years, 2015 to 2018. It's like a boiled frog problem. It's intricate. It's very social why that happened. It's like a drift into failure. That's a popular book. But if if the thing is reducing value throughput by 50%, is relegated to, well, we might do that on the side with 10% time. In the Scrum Guide, the last Scrum Guide finally had like, we recommend that you pull one continuous improvement item into the sprint. Finally. And here I'm sort of saying, like, if it's reducing value throughput of the system by 50%, what else would you work on? How can you work on anything else? If you're adding $10 million of value a month, and that's cut down to $5 million, that thing is worth $5 million a month. So it's something to think about. And this is hard. Obviously, I'm saying these things like it's easy. But if as a PM, you need to take these seriously and not fall, like you need to treat this as a first-class citizen, as a value-creating system. Because if it's taking 300 days to get something, you're not going to be able to experiment. No amount of wishful thinking or aspiration is going to have any impact. You need to be able to go back to the 15 to 30 days. It's important. The next thing you can do right away in your organization, and so I'm coming from this B2B SaaS environment where it's rare to take these very like cool experiment-driven approaches like in the B2C companies. Experimentation is about learning, right? And so what we do in a kickoff is we create our kickoff deck, and we create a before state, a now state, and the expected end state. And we commit as a team to present it back to the organization in 3 months. And just that committing to this, I'll go into and I'll say to a team, can you review your last 10 product decisions and tell me how things have worked out? No. And then when you think about that, yes, the tight feedback loops would be great, but if you're not having any learning, if you're not having any retrospective on these particular items, this is difficult. What I like about this is that even if your organization does have that long, you can't quite fit it together to respond immediately, this will improve your muscle. And that will encourage you because one thing, you'll have a string of things that don't work out, and you'll say, well, maybe we should start together next time. Maybe we should take this approach. So I like doing this because it's very honest, and teams feel, the frontline people, even if you're in a feature factory, will very much appreciate this level of transparency. That will inspire them that more is possible in your organization. Finally, trust. Like, I drew this thing. People love this trust diagram. It somehow resonates with people, but I think it's also really sad in some ways too. And I was thinking about trust in the context, it's so cliche to end on, well, just trust each other more. But it definitely makes this kind of stuff easier. Because what you see is that data and experiment-driven stuff become a trust proxy. It's about getting more budget for your team. It's about winning. It's about showing that you're kicking ass. It's about settling the ties. Like, wow, if we run A/B experiments, we'll never have to have an argument again in our organization. No. Like, that doesn't work like that. In fact, the more you do that stuff, the more you open up to the rigor, the more discussions you have about that. Well, we ran that and we did this. It doesn't solve those problems. It actually opens up those problems that you need to be able to deal with. So it's very cliche to say trust each other. The advice I would give here is that they've done research that small promises kept build trust. And it's like there's science on that part. So if you create accountability-driven promises, like we will get done by the state, of course you're going to fail, because you will fail on those. But if you create promises like we will revisit each product decision 1 to 2 months after we make those product decisions, that's certainly a promise that you could keep. And so that was my one takeaway as I got angsty about this, is that small promises kept build trust. Big promises don't add you that much extra value. So keep small promises. So to review those particular things really fast, those explicit team-driven mission scopes, really, really important. It's okay to build exactly this for a junior team, and it's okay to give a team drive a short-term business outcome. Those things are all valuable. Visualize experiments, not output. Work on that Kanban board thing. Connect the bets. So those sort of nested bet diagrams can be extremely valuable. So when the passionate problem solver says, how does this OKR all fit in, you can tie that 1 to 3 month thing up to that 1 to 3 year thing with all the assumptions that are involved. Start together, like in the Goonies. You can do that. Just look at people's eyes. You'll know that you've done it the right way if they like the haunted house look. Hopefully not the haunted house look. Reduce drag. Well, that's kind of elevating value throughput. So when people say, are you talking about velocity, John? I'm not talking about velocity. I'm talking about value throughput of a system, your ability to create more value as an engineering team. And so when that is compromised, that has to be raised to a first-class citizen. And with a lot of the experiment frameworks, it's doing the nitty-gritty work to make sure that you're getting the data quickly enough and it's clean data and you're offering the right tools. The message to the future thing, like agree as a team to present back in a couple months, super valuable. And then this idea of data as a learning catalyst versus as a trust proxy. That's super high level, and it could be 3 other talks, but it's something to think about. Cool, thanks a lot, everyone.